There's a few different episodes that stand out as jumping off points when it comes to The Walking Dead. Maybe it's an episode like The Day Will Come When You Won't Be, where the loss of two beloved characters and a level of violence was too much for some people, or maybe it's like What Comes After and the departure of Rick Grimes. But over the course of the last year or so that I've been making these videos, whenever this conversation gets brought up, another episode is brought up, and that's Honor. Of course, this is the final episode for Carl Grimes, and this specific plotline has always added a huge bit of controversy within the fandom. In fact, I've oftentimes tried avoiding this conversation and only bringing it up when necessary, because whenever I do mention it, and even in the videos that I don't mention it, there's always somebody who has to add to the conversation that Carl's death was the reason they stopped watching the show. So in this video, I'm going to address everything. What Carl's death did to the franchise, the behind-the-scenes reasons for it, and of course my overall thoughts on not only his death, but this episode as a whole. So let's talk Season 8, Episode 9, Honor. We start off with a crying Rick Grimes saying that his mercy prevails over his wrath. Then we fast forward to the far future when Rick and Judith are going around talking to Jerry, and most noticeably, Siddiq. Then we're in the near future with Rick and Michonne digging a grave. Then we're in the near past to a few episodes ago, Carl helping bring Siddiq into Alexandria when he gets bit. He checks out his wound in the mirror, seeing that the bite went through his shirt, and redresses, going about the day normally. He talks to Tobin and asks where his dad and Michonne are. Tobin hands him a letter from Michonne saying that she'll see him soon. The letter gives him an idea, and he begins writing a few letters of his own. He helps set up a bed for Siddiq and hangs out with his baby sister Judith, taking a picture with her and inking his handprint for her to remember. He buries a plant and feels the sun on his face one final time. We then cut to Morgan at the sanctuary, watching the Saviors enact a plan to get out of the sanctuary by killing off the surrounding walkers. They start shooting at him, and over the radio he tells everybody to get out as fast as they can. Morgan escapes, setting up a trap for the Saviors who are closing in on his position. That night, Carol is giving instructions to everybody on where to go and hide, Henry insisting on coming with her, but she tells him no. Carl tells Rick and Michonne that he got bit trying to help Siddiq, that it's no one's fault and he just got bit. Both Rick and Michonne don't really know how to respond. Siddiq gives them some medical supplies, and Rick asks if Carl saved him because he's a doctor, but Carl says no, he just needed help. The bombs from the Saviors overhead cause the ground above them to shake, and Carl starts coughing. Michonne yells at Dwight, telling him to make the bomb stop, but he says that he can't do that, and they can't leave either, so all they can really do is wait. They talk about going to the hilltop and holding out there, Daryl saying that all of them together will be their worst nightmare. Ezekiel, who's been captured by the Saviors, is awaiting rescue when Carol and Morgan meet and conjure up a plan. Morgan saw Henry and tells Carol that he's here too, but they continue forward with their plan. They sneak up on some Saviors, take them out, wait for more to show themselves, and take them out too. Carol is kind of taken back by Morgan's brutality, but knows that they have to keep on going. Michonne watches over Carl. He says that the world can be better and that it's not supposed to be like this. The bombs stop overhead, and Daryl says he's going to go take a look, handing off Judith to Rick and giving him an extra affectionate pat on the shoulder. Carol and Morgan continue their journey. Morgan's sheer brutality with the stick comes out to play, setting himself up to be exposed until Carol saves him. Gavin talks with Ezekiel, confiding in him, saying that he didn't want this war. Ezekiel says that he can still walk away from something that's already been decided, but Gavin declines. Gavin radios to his Saviors, but they don't respond. Gunfire sounds, and Gavin tells everybody to get Ezekiel inside. They do, and in an extra long shot, we see Morgan and Carol approaching. Then we have another jumble of scenes, close-up of Rick to the far future with Eugene, digging a grave, and back in the tunnels with Carl. Rick insists that he's staying with Carl, and he asks Michonne to take Judith. Daryl volunteers to take her and keep her safe so that way Michonne can stay too. Carl sits up to say goodbye to Judith, giving her the Grimes family hat and telling her a story about how their mom told Carl he would beat this world. He didn't, but she will. Judith starts crying and Daryl takes her away, telling Carl that all these people are alive because of him. Sadiq tells Carl that there's no way he can ever repay him, but he's gonna honor him in every way he can from here on out. Gavin and Ezekiel talk in the theater of the kingdom, Ezekiel again trying to convince him to switch sides, to which Gavin hits him and tells him to shut up. A bomb sounds off at the door, but Carol and Morgan surprise them with an attack from the stage, getting the upper hand on all of them. With Morgan, I mean that quite literally, and now both Ezekiel and Carol are worried about Morgan's mental state. Carl tells Michonne that he doesn't want her to be upset after this, that she needs to be there for his dad. Rick says that they need to get him out of the tunnels, so they do, bringing him up to the church, while the rest of Alexandria goes up in flames. Morgan chases after Gavin like some sort of horror movie monster and finds him. Gavin pleads for his life before saying that they can't beat Negan and they can go back to their arrangement that they had before. Morgan points the staff at him and helps him up. Ezekiel and Carol try to talk Morgan off the ledge of killing Gavin, but he says that he has to. Before he can get a chance to, Henry's the one to actually do it, and Morgan realizes the effect he's truly had. Carl thanks his dad for getting him here, for letting him live the life that he had. He also talks about somebody that he killed at the prison, how easy it was for him to pull the trigger. Rick says that he was just a kid back then, emulating his father. Carl agrees and says that when Rick tried to make peace with the governor, that changed Carl, and that version of his father is still there somewhere, and it's the version that needs to come back. Rick says that he can't go back to being that person, that it's different now. Carl disagrees and tells his father about his vision for the future. And we see that all the scenes of the far future that we've been seeing over the course of the season have actually just been Carl's dream. Rick tells him that everything he's ever done has been for him, it always will be, and he's gonna make Carl's vision an actual reality. Ezekiel talks to Henry, telling him that it's okay to look at him, but Carol yells at him and tells him that he should have stayed put. Rick apologizes to Carl, saying that he should have been there, and Carl pulls out a gun. The reality of the situation hits Rick and Michonne, and Carl says that he has to do this himself. Carl tells his dad that he loves him, and Rick says that he's gonna make the future real for him. Rick and Michonne step outside and hear the sound of a silenced gunshot from inside. They continue digging the grave, and Carl's vision for the future is completed, where a young Judith goes up to Negan, who's living peacefully in Alexandria. So I'm going to do my best to play devil's advocate here. The first part of this analysis is going to be about how Carl's death actually added to the story being told. Season 8 actually has a phenomenal storyline for our protagonist, Rick Grimes. The first half of the season showed us how Rick is hell-bent on getting revenge against Negan. He stops at nothing, treats the enemy with no mercy whatsoever, and doesn't even really stop that when Carl dies. But Carl's conversation with him in this episode certainly planted an idea in his head. By the end of the season, Rick realizes that he has to follow through on the promise that he made to Carl, sparing Negan and the Saviors in the process in order to grant Carl's final wishes. There is no other character that could have changed Rick's mind like this. A lot of people say that they could substitute Carl for Morgan and the story would have been the same, and could they have done that? Yeah, I guess, but it wouldn't have made a lick of sense emotionally. Rick and Morgan don't actually have the greatest of relationships or even friendships, especially compared to some other characters like Daryl or Michonne. Another big problem is that all of the adult characters are also so zeroed in and centered on coming out on top in this war. Carl is the only character who doesn't feel that way for some reason, but I'll get to that later. Season 8 is a convoluted and badly edited mess of a season. Even some of the scenes in this episode are so strangely edited, but there's also these close-up shots of Rick near that tree, and the first time you're watching this season, none of this makes any sense at all. It's meant to build up the confrontation that Rick and Negan have in the season finale, but even that one isn't all that great. But if you're looking at the season as a whole, on paper, the storyline absolutely does flow and it makes sense. It's just the breaking up of these storylines and episodes is at an all-time low when it comes to The Walking Dead. Carl's death is here to serve one purpose, and that's to further Rick's character development, and when you look at it that way, the death does make sense. Now, before I go over the reasons why this was a horrible decision, let's talk about the other stuff in the episode. The B-plot of this episode revolves around Morgan and Carol saving Ezekiel, but it also very carefully highlights Morgan with his current mental state. Morgan is, at the beginning of the episode, smart in his approach to getting rid of the saviors, but as it goes on and his thirst for blood grows, he starts putting himself in more and more dangerous situations. What I found very interesting is that a lot of the music in this episode from this storyline is very similar to the music that they used when Rick had his famous encounter with the Claimers. I suppose that this theme or this sound of music is used whenever a character has become so bloodthirsty they'll stop at nothing to get their revenge. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with this plotline, but it does ultimately end up not really going anywhere in this show. And I emphasize saying in this show because, of course, after this season, Morgan goes to be the main character of Fear the Walking Dead. They set up this interesting dynamic with Henry and how his influences around him are causing him to do much more mature things than he should be doing at that age, and that's a theme reflected throughout the whole episode. Carl talks with his dad about how his actions at the prison influenced Carl's behavior, and because of that, Carl figured out how easy it was to take another person's life. In a lot of ways, this episode is sort of passing the torch between Carl and Henry. That was on full display in the next season with the time jump and Henry really filling in the shoes of Carl's storyline, but then they also eventually disregarded Henry's character so that Judith could fill the shoes of Carl. So with all that said, let's talk about Carl's story and how it doesn't make any sense at all. The most important character in any story is the protagonist. In The Walking Dead, that's of course Rick Grimes. Every decision made in regards to side characters somehow relates back to the protagonist. Not in every case, but in most cases. And the same is true with Carl's character, except if you look at Carl's character journey on its own, it doesn't make sense. Carl starts off as a kid, plain and simple, more or less a background character. And as the seasons go on, he obviously grows up. But he grows up in such a twisted world, seeing his dad and people around him do all these questionable things, his moral compass is off by a lot. He brings this up in the final episode of season 4 when he talks to Michonne, saying that he's worried he's going down a dark path. When he gets to Alexandria, it's nice to be around other kids, but even he shares his father's thoughts about this place and how the people there aren't ready to survive. In season 7, after seeing both Glenn and Abraham get killed, and his father doing nothing about it, Carl takes matters into his own hands, trying to kill Negan himself. At the end of season 7, he almost gets killed by Negan and is ready to engage in all-out war. This is personal now. Carl's always emulated what his father's doing, so in season 8, he's going to be out for blood. This is going to be so great. Alright, let's start this. And now he wants nothing but peace between the communities. This change is so drastic to the point that it's unbelievable. To top it all off, Carl is only actually in 4 episodes of season 8. By the time we're at the 9th episode, the big climactic death of Carl Grimes, he's been in less than half of the season. This need for change doesn't build up enough, and I think the writers were hoping that, I don't know, maybe because Carl was never put front and center in the spotlight, the general audience wouldn't recognize when his character was out of sync. So while Carl's story and ultimate role in this universe makes sense from the outside looking in, when you look at the character patterns across the 8 seasons he's in the show, it doesn't really line up. Now, let's talk about Chandler Riggs. There's always been people who've had problems with his acting, his hair, his role in the story, whether that be from comic fans who wanted his role to be more closely adapted from the source material, or people who just flat out didn't like him. Being honest, Carl was never one of my favorites in the show. Even though I was roughly the same age as Chandler in the show, I always found his storylines to be pretty weak, especially the stuff in Alexandria and the teenage love triangle. It's just not what I was looking for in The Walking Dead. But every time that Carl had a close brush with death, and there's been a few times, I never actually wanted him gone from the show. I remember watching No Way Out with my family when it first premiered, and we were all so shocked when Carl got shot, and he wasn't anybody's favorite in my family, but that also didn't mean that we wanted him killed off. I recognize how important the role Carl played for Rick. and I always felt that Carl could eventually take over as the lead of the show should anything ever happen to Andrew Lincoln. Well, Andrew Lincoln left the show, but Carl wasn't around to take over. So I did some research into why Carl Grimes was actually killed off, and it seems like there's two sides to this story. And both parties still keep things pretty close to their chest when it comes to this topic. Perhaps these questions will never have answers, maybe eventually they will, but right now it's pretty much a guessing game. One side of the story comes from Scott Gimple, who says that killing off Carl was there purely as motivation for Rick to change his mind about killing Negan. And that's a pretty good answer, because that lines up with the story that's told in the TV show, except Carl didn't die in the comics, so why was there even a need to kill Carl in the first place? You see, Chandler Riggs was turning 18, meaning that he was going to be a fully fledged adult and would need to be paid like one. Before that, he was still technically a child, so it meant he was on set for less hours of the day, and he wasn't getting as big of a paycheck. Chandler also said that he wanted to go to college and film the show at the same time. He just recently bought a house in Georgia, close to the set, because he was told he was going to be on the show for at least 3 more years. So here comes Chandler's side of the story, told primarily through the lens of his father. In a now very much deleted post, Chandler's father said that Chandler was devastated to receive the call that he was going to be killed off. Having just bought a house and told all these things about how he was going to get another contract, Chandler's father said that he didn't like how Gimple was dishonest with a 17-year-old kid. Nowadays, Chandler still gets questions about it, and he seems to be PR prepped or just very smart, saying that he's thankful for his time on the show, there's no bitterness on his end, but there still seems to be a lot hidden beneath the surface when it comes to this topic. A lot of people think that it comes down to money. They didn't want to pay Chandler that additional money now that he was going to be an adult, and killing him off in service to the story was just an easy way out. Which also doesn't make any sense, considering in the next season they had 5 new adult main characters join the cast. To me, this whole situation just smells bad. Whether it was due to money, Riggs wanting to split his time with the show in college, or even if it was just due to writing, there's no doubt in my mind that this decision backfired on the showrunners big time. I don't think that they'll ever admit it, but killing off Carl was, for a lot of people, the straw that broke the camel's back, and if it wasn't that, it was probably Andrew Lincoln leaving a few episodes later. And this is just pure speculation on my part, but I can't imagine Andrew Lincoln was too happy with the decision to kill off Carl. I believe that there's some alternate universe out there where they didn't kill off Carl, and Andrew Lincoln stayed with the show the whole way through. And I know Andrew Lincoln said that he left the show to spend time with family. I understand that, but maybe Carl's death was also the straw that broke the camel's back for him. Maybe he was on the fence about leaving, and when that decision came, he saw maybe it should be his time too. Carl's death destroyed any and all future that the show still had. Yes, the show went on, and it did get better after the low point that was season 8, but the people who left because of Carl's death will probably never know that because they don't care to see it anymore. If Andrew Lincoln still left the show in the 9th season, it would have been the perfect time to introduce Carl as the new protagonist. They could have still left in Judith, especially with the time jump, and kept her whole storyline in the show, while also giving Carl his comic book stories. And maybe even some of Rick's stories now that he's gone. I feel like with that 6-year time jump, Carl could have taken that next step as a leader and a fighter, make him this sort of John Connor-esque character that everybody around him looks up to. But none of that happened. This still has huge ramifications even in the Walking Dead universe today. Everybody wants to see Rick reunite with those people around him and his family, but even when/if he reunites with Judith, it won't pack the same punch that it would have if it had been Carl. In Season 9, Rick starts building the new world that Carl envisioned, and for a while, a lot of these visions did end up coming true. Negan hanging around peacefully in Alexandria, and Carl could have been the one who planned this and maintained it. But all these decisions eventually came back to bite them in the ass, which is a real shame because as a 17-year-old kid who just bought a house to be close to the set, I can't imagine that was an easy pill to swallow. Chandler Riggs, wherever you are, On the off chance that you're watching this, know that a majority of the fan base sticks behind you. We all think it was a shitty decision, and we're sorry that it happened. But he's also probably sick of all these conversations anyway. Probably just wants to move on in life, and I generally try to keep things light on this channel, focus on the good of The Walking Dead instead of the bad, but I stumbled on an article talking about this subject, and I just felt the need to make this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this episode, the whole character of Carl in general, and your thoughts on his death. There's bound to be some contrarians in the comments who will say that they liked Carl's death, so go ahead and give me a good reason. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. If you do, then I'll see you in the next one.
Yeah.